I'll just do the quick roll call if that's okay.
That's perfect.
So just screen here, if you're here, please. Aaron Moran?
Here.
Tiffany Clark? Nyla?
Here.
Andy Gutenberg?
Yep.
Mayor Heimbrecher?
Here.
Jim Kaufman? Here. Mary Ellen Kearney?
Here.
Adam Kreisman? Pat Lally?
Here.
Robert McPherson? Here. Michelle Nell?
Here.
Maria Pat?
Here.
Hannah Russell?
Here.
Alan Schaff? Ashley Slater? Slater? Am I saying it right? Slater. Jeff Tooze? Here. Susan Bergerath?
Here.
Karen Von Huten? Karen?
It's here.
He's here?
Or not here.
Okay. Tom Wilson? Brad Zeman? Okay. We will. Make sure she was. Yep.
I just pressed escape. All right. Sorry about that. I've forgotten how we do things. It's been 2 months. Yeah, so welcome back. How was your summer break? It feels like you've been gone for 2 months.
Let's give a picture right now.
Yes, I know. We can compare this to what's happening outside there. And the light is actually really quite beautiful off of Lake Waunakee at this moment. So it is quite the night. I'm hoping we don't have to roll up our pants, but we do. That makes it all the more exciting. So I'm just going to start out like we usually do. I'll go over the goals for today. I'll go over the agenda. And then I'll look back at what we've done over the past few meetings, since it's been a while since we've been together. And a little bit of old business. I'll talk about the survey for a second or two before we get started today. So today's goals, as distributed on the agenda last week, is to develop an understanding of policy, financing, and development options for affordable housing in Waunakee. Second, we're hoping to determine some of our goals or our targets for affordable housing in Waunakee, the number of units at least. And then begin by identifying some strategies and policies to increase the supply of affordable housing in Waunakee. So that's where we're headed with today's meeting. The agenda, introduction, and review, that's right now, obviously. Then we've got 4 speakers who are here today. And I will go, actually, if you don't mind, I'll mention a little bit about who they are now. So Kurt Paulson is here. He's our first speaker today. And Kurt Paulson is from the Department of Planning and Landscape and Architecture at UW-Madison. He's also a resident of the city of Middleton and is on the, I'm going to draw a blank on this. It's the Workforce Housing Task Force in Middleton. And that's not the only time you kind of lived your scholarship, though. You were part of the Lehigh Community Valley Planning Commission and his Regional Planning Commission in Pennsylvania, and the Township Zoning Board. So he's really going to put his scholarship into practice, and we're very happy to have him here today. Arriving in a few minutes, we'll have Tom Landgraf, who's from the UW-Madison School of Business, Real Estate and Urban Land Economics. And he's a lecturer in the Department of Real Estate and Urban Land Economics, and he teaches residential property development classes. And he's the principal also of Dimension Development LLC, which provides public and private clients advice on development of affordable housing. So another person who's really putting kind of their scholarship into practice. Our third speaker tonight will be Greg Rosenberg, and he is an affordable housing consultant. He's the principal of Rosenberg Associates, and he helped found both the U.S. National Community Land Trust Network and the Community Land Trust Academy. So he'll be our third speaker today. Our fourth speaker today will be arriving in a few minutes, and we plan on everybody arriving a little bit after 5:30, and I'm thinking with the flooding, maybe a little bit after that even. But our fourth speaker today will be Ann Reynolds, and she's the former co-director, recently retired, of UW-Madison Center for Cooperatives. And Ann has spent the last 20 years as the director of the cooperatives, and is currently part of the effort to get the Madison Public Market going. And she's a trustee on the Cooperative Foundation as well, so a really wide base of experience. So that's our second thing on the agenda today. Third, Q&A panel discussion with our speakers. We'll break for a while then, and then we'll come back and we'll do a full discussion. And after we're done with our discussion, we wanted to, Sharon and I were talking today and thought we might want to revisit our April agenda. There's a conflict with our speaker who's coming in April, which is, on one hand, we're hoping not to have a conflict, he may be able to work it out, but on the other hand, he was going to do some design work for us, and it seems that we are kind of maybe moving in a different direction as a committee, and that might not be necessary, maybe we might want to do some other things then. So we'll discuss that at the end of the night tonight. A little bit of old business that we've got going on. So thank you guys all very much for testing the survey. In between the test of the survey back in February and now, our survey software vendor is migrating us from one platform to another, from a cooperative extension platform to a UW-Madison platform. So rather than launching the survey this week at our meeting, as I hope to do, I'm going to delay it until we get back from spring break, until the schools are back from spring break, but also until our IT department is fully up and running on March 25th. When that launches on March 25th, what I'll do is I'll send to everybody on the task force a link to the live resident survey. There are 2 other surveys that will be distributed through alternative methods. Several of you, when you went through the survey, you said, this isn't really a great survey if somebody's a commuter or a stakeholder to Waunakee but doesn't necessarily live here. There's a second survey that is designed specifically to explore the needs of commuters and people who work in Waunakee but don't necessarily live here. That'll be distributed through businesses in the area. That's the second survey. And then the third survey is the youth survey for grades 7 through 12. We won't ask 6th graders and under. In 7th grade, they're really able to take a survey. It's a sustained attention sort of thing, but also they're able to answer the questions that we want, and at an age where it's easier for us to ask them the questions that we need to have. So those 3 surveys will launch Monday, March 25th. The slowest launch of those 3 will be the commuter survey. That doesn't need to roll out at the same time as the others. So that link will go live on March 25th, but we'll see if we're keeping track of the surveys coming in. That'll build slowly over several weeks, as opposed to the resident survey, which will probably, if previous experience is correct, launch and go live pretty quickly. We'll see a lot of responses from that. So thank you guys. Did you guys have any other feedback for the survey? A lot of people put comments in.
I have a question. Do we want people to take the survey who would have lived here but couldn't find housing?
Yes.
So what survey should they take?
I would have them, my guess would be, the one I prefer they would take is the commuter stakeholder survey.
Okay.
And that, because in that particular survey, we're asking about what is their rental price range, what is their housing price range, what are their parameters for how far they're willing to drive to a job. Those are more of the questions that might get at the reasons that they didn't move here, as opposed to the resident survey, which is really about that person's experience living in Waunakee relative to housing. Yeah. What other questions do you have? Yes.
Why would you not share the business survey with the members of this task force so that if they have contact with a commuter or another person, that they could say, oh, hey, why don't you take the survey?
Oh, certainly, yeah, I'll send the link out. It's the primary means of distribution for getting that number way up, though, is going to be the businesses. Yeah, there's not a single link that I'll send to you that you shouldn't do. The resident survey is what we really come in the task force. There's no great mechanism, unlike an employer or a school district, for getting at that population, Twitter and Facebook, which are pretty good methods, as it turns out. Yeah, other questions that you have? All right, great. There was one question on there. A couple people caught it halfway through the survey. Some of the answers to how long have you lived in Waunakee, or how old were you when you moved to Waunakee? For some reason, it gave only one answer option, preschool or younger. The live version that you will get will have all different age groups to answer. It was a really interesting phenomenon to happen. All right, so a little bit about where we've been. Our task force charge is to gain full understanding of the existing housing inventory in Waunakee, to identify the areas of realistic housing need in which the Waunakee housing marketplace ought to provide a supply, and craft potential policy modifications. So that's our charge. And if we go all the way back to September when we first met, here's where we've been so far. Our very first presentations really kind of framed the problem for us in terms of what type of housing do we want this to be, and we said that amenities are crucial to a vital community, and we affirmed as a task force that access to amenities are a matter of equity and should not be restricted to those who can afford it. And we said along with that, or we discussed at that particular meeting, that we should consider walkability, access to parks, schools, libraries, food and transportation when we're planning affordable housing. So those were our first two meetings, our first two presentations at that first meeting. Our second presentations at our third and fourth meetings, we talked about who lived in Waunakee, and we had a presentation that was given to us. The presenter couldn't be here, that talked about the demographic profile, and we found that 59% of those commuting to Waunakee make less than $3,333 per month. And that was Matt Curis's. Matt Curis was here to present. And we also talked about the fact that Dane County will add 69,000 additional households by 2050. The average household size will be 2.2 people. And that even though we're looking at kind of a shift in who lives here in terms of the proportion, the number of people in the prime working age of 25 to 49 won't substantially change, but they'll make a smaller portion overall of the population as our population age and the baby boomers continue to move towards retirement. So those were our third and our fourth presentations. Does anyone have anything you want to add from those presentations? Anything that sticks out that you remember? All right. Well, with that, I've got two handouts that I want to hand out before I turn the floor over to Kurt. This first one here is a reflection sheet. We've got a lot of speakers tonight, so Sharon and I put together a reflection sheet that will hopefully, thank you. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great. That will help us kind of keep track of what everybody's saying, write down some good ideas. The second sheet that Chris is handing out. There we go. You're welcome. Hey, Randy. You all right, Randy? Welcome. So the second sheet is a graph that we saw early on in the process where we talked about Waunakee's median income by household. And this was using, I think we used an older version of census than the data that you used. Our numbers are a little bit lower in terms of median income. So we can update that when Kurt's speaking. We've got some updated numbers tonight that come across. But it gives us an idea of where we're talking. We're talking about the missing middle and what does that median income mean for us in terms of who might we target for affordable housing, what might that affordable housing look like. So two good things to keep in mind and to review. Do we have any questions before we move on? Suggestions for the good of the cause? With that, Kurt, the floor is yours. And let me, okay. Let me move over to the presentation here. And thank you. I left you out.
Okay.
And thank you very much for coming to speak.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me in the back? So, as I was telling Kristen, I just live 10 minutes away down the road in Middleton, and it probably would have been easier to swim here tonight. So we kind of know a little bit about flooding. So just a little bit more about me. I'm also on the Plan Commission in Middleton. So, and the courses I teach at UW are housing and municipal finance. So if you have any questions about TIF and how that works, I can explain those as well. I also have to say that I consult for Dane County and for WIDA, so nothing I say here, since it's being recorded, reflects any of the views of any of the groups I've worked with. This is my own opinion. So what I want to do is I'm going to share a little bit about what we've done for a housing task force in Middleton for the last 10 years. And then I'm also the author of the Dane County Housing Needs Assessment. And you're going to get a preview of the report that should have been out a month ago that I'll finish next week on spring break, which is the updated County Housing Needs Assessment. So you're the first municipality to get the briefing on the official numbers. So since you're the world's only Waunakee, it's only fair. So, and yes, my kids go to Middleton High School, so when it comes to sports, there's a rivalry there. So a little bit about Middleton. Most of you probably already know this, but I always like to set the context. We have about 20,000 people in population, so that's about 7,000 more than Waunakee. We have about almost 9,000 housing units now. We've had tremendous growth over the years. And we have about 51% of our units are single family and about 40% are multifamily. And we don't have any specific target in our comprehensive plan, but we've always talked at the Plan Commission that one of our goals is to keep kind of a balanced housing supply between at least 50% single family and then 50% multifamily. So we're about 55% owner occupied, about 44% renter occupied. Our median house value, according to the census, is $293,000, but good luck finding a decent quality home in Middleton for sale. I just checked on Zillow, and if you're going to buy something for $293,000, it's going to be pretty small, pretty old, and in need of a lot of repair. So we have entry-level housing right now that's really running about $400,000. So we have many of the same housing challenges you do. A police officer, teacher, nurse who works for the school district or the city probably can't afford to live in Middleton right now. So we're aware of that. We have kind of a unique situation is that we've become a kind of major job center, about 18,000 jobs, and we have at least 1,000 being planned. It seems like every week on the Plan Commission, a new development's coming in that's 200 jobs or 500 jobs. So we're very much aware of the fact that it's kind of both a moral obligation and a sense of good planning that if we're going to take a lot of jobs, we better take a lot of housing. Because the key to workforce housing is either you have to build housing near where people work, or you have to build really good transit to get them to work. And if you don't have either one, then our business community tells us it makes it hard for them to hire or retain workers. And I know, I've talked to some employers in Waunakee, and I know they're saying the same thing, right? So we have public transit with great schools, beautiful public lands, and the like. I like to show that, I'm not sure this shows up, but MG&E has great data on rental occupancy. And so on the blue line here shows the number of multifamily rental units we've had in Middleton. There you can see that really we started building a lot in 2014. We were building along at kind of a decent clip, even during the recession. But of course, from about 2010 to 2014, countywide, very few people were building anything. Started to get financing. So there was a big rush of rental demand and not a lot of supply. So we've jumped up. You can see that with the vacancy rate. When we talk about vacancy rates for multifamily, most housing market analysts will tell you, Tom will certainly tell you this, that you want about 5% vacancy rate is kind of a balanced market. So we're well below 2% vacancy rates in our zip code. And this is the kind of central urban core of Madison, Dane County area, all the Madison, Middleton, Fitchburg, and Monona zip codes. This is kind of your central apartment market served by transit. And there you can see again that vacancies have hovered around 3% for the last couple of years, but still are well below what would be considered a normal market. So one of the things we know both in Middleton and in the county is, even though it looks like we're building a ton of apartments, right, and you hear this a lot, it's still not adequate to deal with both the new households we're adding and the overhang from all the years when we didn't build enough. So I always like to remind us why this all matters. Families with children or older households who cannot afford a decent, safe, affordable house, they cut back on different vital needs. So they cut back on food, they cut back on health care, they cut back on transportation. So a little bit about Middleton's Workforce Housing Committee. It was established in 2007. A number of the programs that we undertake for our committee. And I think part of why I'm speaking to you is one of the things that has helped our city to move housing forward is that this is an institutionalized committee appointed by the mayor, confirmed by city council. It's part of the regular order of our city. And many other cities in the last couple of years have already established committees. Obviously Madison has those, but Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, and I've worked with them on many of these issues. We've done a down payment assistance program. We're waiting on a number of loans to be repaid so that we can loan that out again. We provide impact fee waivers for lower cost housing as allowed by state statute. We oftentimes will negotiate agreements with developers to include a number of workforce units in those properties. Sometimes and oftentimes this is through the TIF development process. We've used TIF to support affordable housing and workforce housing projects, including the Heritage Senior Housing Campus that's on Allen Boulevard. If you've been there, the Amherst Road residential development, that was a partnership with Habitat to create some kind of affordable townhouses. Meadow Ridge Apartments and Market West Apartments, that's J.T. Klein's company. So Jocelyn, we don't work for J.T. Klein anymore, sorry. Jocelyn's one of my former students, so I have to give her a shout out. But she was working on those projects. And then Cardinal Row Apartments is right near the high school. We use TIF to help develop some housing so that people can access our high school. And then the other thing we do in our committee is any residential development goes to us in addition to the Plan Commission, Public Works. And we review those, try to negotiate with the developer, see if we can work out a number of workforce units in it. We might write letters of support to the Plan Commission and City Council as to our support of a development project. So part of what I do whenever we are talking about workforce and affordable housing in a community is we always just start from the basics about what is the numbers we're talking about for targeting. We are always using the Dane County numbers, and that's in some ways what HUD and all of the other programs utilize is the county median income. And so it helps to remind us that, for example, we tend to associate rental workforce housing is being targeted around families earning 60% of area median income and below. So for a family of 3, that might mean $49,560. Right? So these are in your handouts. I'm not going to walk you through the numbers, but this is the most recent numbers. This is the best way to think about what your needs are. This is how every program utilizes an estimate of where a household is relative to area median income. Okay? Then we convert this into how much you can afford to spend to be considered affordable. That is 30% of your income. So for, again, a family of 3 in Dane County making 60%, so like $49,560, that could be a one parent who's like a city clerk or an entry-level police officer, maybe 2 parents working $15 an hour jobs or in the retail sector. They can afford to spend $1,239. Now that sounds like a lot to most of us, because the interesting thing is that's lower than my mortgage. I mean, that's more than my mortgage. But we just had a development proposal come in last night, the Plan Commission, and studio bedroom, 1-bedroom studio apartments in Middleton, market rate, we're going to be $1,239. So part of what makes it difficult for us in Middleton, for you in Waunakee, when I talk to Fitchburg and Sun Prairie, is just the fact that we are a high income, high land cost county. And so most of our workforce gets squeezed because our wages have not kept up with housing costs. So we always recommend, and I always recommend, that you use the WIDA rent limits to think about what types of units you're providing at a particular scale that would be affordable to a household. So again, the question is, if you're really thinking about how many 2-person families you have in your community that earn about half of the median income, how many rental units do you have that can afford $860? So, and I see a lot of you trying to read the numbers. They're on the handouts. You may have to squint to see them. The other thing we do is there's a method developed by HUD, which I can talk about more if you want, to convert income levels to what would be considered an affordable entry-level housing price. Again, using our family of 3, making 60% of median income, they could afford to buy a house with a low down payment FHA product of $166,522. I don't know about you, but there haven't been houses for sale anywhere in Dane County for $166,000, probably since the 1980s. So this becomes the challenge, is for most of our workforce who want to eventually accumulate enough savings for a down payment and move into a home ownership opportunity. A, there's limited supply, and B, the supply that is there is either really expensive or really old and in need of upgrading and repair. and that also is hard to qualify for a mortgage if you're going to spend up to 130% of the value just to improve it. So our workforce housing strategy was, I think it was your assignment to read. If there's any mistakes in it, you can blame me because I wrote it. It was this amazing story. We wrote this strategy and thought, okay, what are we going to do to kind of try to get public support for this? So we presented it to City Council, and City Council not only loved it, they adopted it unanimously, and without our asking, we had lots of people show up to City Hall telling City Council, you need to adopt the strategy. And this wasn't the kind of social justice, civil rights people, this was the business owners and the Chamber of Commerce saying, you need to adopt this strategy. So because we are an emerging job center and we're committed to compact development, we want a mixed income and diverse community where people who work in Middleton are able to afford to live in Middleton. So feel free to steal that as your slogan, right? That's the way to think about it. People who work in Waunakee able to afford to live here. And this was also based on our commitment to the state law, which requires that you actually supply housing that meets forecasted needs and provides a range of housing choices that meets the needs of persons of all income levels. I find that most people around the state are not aware of the fact that this is actually state law. So that's something to consider, especially because beginning January 1st, 2020, your community, because you have over 10,000 people, will have to prepare a report indicating how you're meeting your housing demand. Were you aware of this? Okay. If you want, I have an hour-long training session I just did for Extension on how to do these reports, so we can get that to you. And we used the Dane County Housing Needs Assessment and chose that we wanted to produce 295 units of affordable housing in 3 to 5 years, and we are well on our way, somewhere between 150 and 180, depending on how you count. So we had 14 strategy recommendations, both on ownership and on rental. So we talked about loans and down payment assistance for affordable home ownership, programs trying to target seniors who want to remain in their homes, but may have a cash flow problem in terms of upgrading the air quality, the furnace, these sort of home repairs. We talked about smaller lots, flexible design, and then working with a county agency, the Home Buyers Roundtable, which I encourage you to work with. We also decided that we really want to target affordable housing opportunities in our 2 tax increment finance districts because that would provide financing. We have workforce housing as part of the strategy in each of those TID districts, so spending on affordable housing or workforce housing is allowed because it's in the project plan, and also then you could leverage the creation of new jobs and development to fund affordable housing. We kind of created a kind of informational system so that any developer who's approaching the city staff would share with them all the programs and funding sources available. We provide impact fee waivers, recommend reduced parking requirements for affordable apartments. We've given out a lot of those. In some ways, it's a little easier for us. We have bus service, so if you're going to build affordable apartments near buses, we can give you a parking waiver. We also looked at WIDA's scoring criteria of the high-need census tracts, and we said to developers, if you locate in there, you're going to get more points on the scoring criteria, and that's where we want it, right? And then we also talked about updating our comprehensive plan, which we are in the middle of right now, to be much more aggressive in terms of providing a range of housing choices. Okay, so just I'm going to walk through a couple projects that we did. So Market West Apartments is right near Greenway Station. And this was a developer, private developer, with no federal money and no state money at all. This was just on our own as a city. He came to us and he said, you know, I'm building near Greenway Station. There's a lot of demand for workers, people who want to shop there. It's a nice outdoor mall. But he really wanted to work with the city to provide some of those units to be affordable for the workforce. So because it was a TIF project, we were able to use some of the TIF money to help the development, and in exchange, in essence, bought down 23 of the units, so about 10% of the units to be affordable at 60% of AMI. So this is one of the ways you can do it. The advantage of this is that there's no interaction with federal or state agencies. We just did it. It's part of the negotiations, part of the TIF agreement, he'll survive if he sells the project, and we can get a high quality product that adds a lot of value to our tax base and also provides a lot of housing right near where there's thousands of jobs. Okay? The difficulty, of course, is if you can't use TIF to meet all your affordable housing needs, because you have to you want to try to leverage federal resources. So most of our other projects have been using TIF as the gap financing for projects that are financed through WIDA's tax credit program. So Parmenter Circle is an affordable housing development, and I'll tell you how good the quality of design is. Even I, as a housing person, didn't know until I looked up and found out that it got tax credits. I didn't know that it was tax credits. So we try to show these pictures to show people you can build high quality development that is affordable, financed with the tax credit. If you didn't know this was an affordable housing project, driving by, you would have never figured it out. So that's 50 units, 40 of them are affordable, 10 market rate. A wide range of mixes. This is the other thing we try to do when we work with developers, is not just all one-bedroom units, not just all two-bedroom units, but we want a mixture of unit types in each building, and we want some affordable, some market rate. Right? So we're trying to provide a range of choices at various locations that people can use. It's close to transit, close to high school, close to Culver's, most importantly. It's also close to Costco. So, and here's just the funding sources. You can see how it works out. Meadow Ridge, again, that one that Jocelyn worked on, is now fully occupied. It was 100% pre-leased prior to even being completed. So our goal, we identified priority areas. Jacob Klein, the developer, took that goal, acquired land. We wrote the letter in support of his tax credits, got the rezoning done, and it's 95 unit mixed income development. So we have 16 units where Dane County Housing Authority has some project-based vouchers in there. So we're getting 30% of median income. And then we have up to 19 units that are market rate. So we have some services and units reserved for veterans and disabled. It's walking distance, thousands of planned jobs, schools, transit, shopping, and of course, again, Culver's. There's a theme here, right? So we put in about $1.3 million in TIF financing to get a $16.3 million project. And this is adding tax base, it's adding economic development, and it helps to provide that range of housing choices. So if you ever get a chance, it's right on Lisa Lane, right near Culver's and Costco. So drive by and just look at the quality of the architecture, how it works, and you'll realize it doesn't look like an affordable housing development. How are we doing on time? I'm going way over our time. Okay, so let me just talk briefly about the county's updated housing needs assessment, which we hope to distribute in a week or two. Again, setting the context for Dane County. As a county, we have grown 1.3% a year in population and in income, but our housing units have fallen behind. So we're only about 1.1% a year. Jobs are growing and rents are growing faster than inflation. So this is a story you already know, but it helps set the story that we are falling behind. We have to build a lot of units and a lot of variety of units at different price points to meet the needs of all of our workforce. So I'm going to skip that. One of the things that a lot of communities are very interested in when we talk to them, and in my report, is how do I figure out what's my gap? So we talk about this gap, which is there's the number of people who might live in your community or work in your community or want to live in your community if they could afford it, versus the supply of housing that they can afford based on the income they earn in the workforce. We always talk about workforce housing to help emphasize the fact that most of these people who are living in your community, even at really low incomes, are in the workforce or they're seniors, right? And these people are already in our communities paying too much. So one method is we just calculate how many households you have living in your community right now whose income is extremely low versus how many housing units you have that are affordable to those households. So this is one way to measure the gap. you can see that the cities obviously have a larger gap. Middleton has a gap of 420. So our previous strategy said 295, we're up to 420. It doesn't mean we failed, it means that we've built hundreds of units that are affordable, but we've not kept up with overall population growth, because with overall population growth, you get upper income households and lower income working families. So here's Waunakee, listed first among villages, so there you go. You're the first among all villages. Under this analysis, your gap could be considered to be 105 affordable housing units. And that's the difference between the number of low-income households who already live in your community. Right? They cut your hair, they serve the sandwiches, their kids go to your kids' schools, but there's not enough units for them to live here affordably. The other way to look at the gap, which is a little larger number, is to look at the people who are already living here, who are paying more than 50% of their income on rent. So think about that. If you're low income, it's very expensive to live anywhere. But if half of your income goes to rent, there's not a lot left over for food, transportation, clothing, books for your kids. And what does that also mean? It also means if your car breaks down or something goes wrong in your apartment and you're out $200, right? I mean, I just had the plumber over earlier today. My garbage disposal went up. That's $200. Well, that's not a problem for me. But if you're living with 50% of your income in rent, any little ding like that can really set you back. So for Waunakee, you have currently about 105 owner-occupied households who are paying more than 50% of their income in rent. So let's think about for a minute who these people are. If you make less than half of the median income and you own your house, given how expensive housing is, these are almost entirely, in all the data I've seen, these are seniors who still live in their house, but either they're paying a mortgage or just the electricity, the gas, the water, and the property taxes eat up more than half of their income. If you were to design a program, as we've done, where Monona is a good example to look at, of a kind of a low-interest loan program to help seniors improve the quality of their house, maybe upgrade the HVAC systems, do some insulation to reduce your electric and gas bills. You have a clientele there of owners. And then in terms of renters, you have about 125 extremely low-income renters living in your community right now who are paying more than half of their income in rent. So again, when we did our strategy in Middleton, we took kind of the in-between of both of these numbers. So you have a number of about 105 and 125. One reasonable starting point would be somewhere in between there as a target number of affordable units. And that's the end of my show. Put that one back up.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that between 50% and 80% of the area median income?
Right. So, again, across the county, people who make more than half of the median income, there's still a number of these families that are struggling. But as a percentage, it's quite low. So most of our rental affordability problem across the county is for families making less than half the median income. But again, remember that for a family of 3 in Dane County, that's about $44,000. So these are people who are working. This is not, I mean, I have to be careful how I say it, because when I teach housing, I'm trying to teach my students to dispel myths, right? This is not people whose main source of income is cash assistance. These are people who are working and cannot afford a decent, affordable, safe, and healthy house close to where they work. And so people who are making between 50% and 80% of area median income, who are paying too much in rent, it's likely that they have either a large family, and it's very difficult anywhere in this county to find rental housing with more than 2 bedrooms. So that's the other big need that we have across the county. So these are likely families with a number of children. And the only reason I have stars here for all the other municipalities is that the number is not within the margin of error, so I don't report the data. But here in Middleton, for example, right, we don't have as big of a problem for our households making above half the median income. Our biggest problem is for households making below the median income. Okay. Yeah.
Kurt, you guys have done amazing work in 11 years. This list is very impressive. Think back, I don't know if you were there or part of this when it started. What obstacles did you have to overcome, and what strategies got you to establish a official force and this kind of mission statement? And
so I didn't join the task force until about 2010. But it was, so the establishment of the task force was pushed by the mayor. So the first lesson is political leadership really matters. So I know we have elected officials here, but one of the things that all of you can do is keep putting a bug in the ear of your village board members, your county board supervisors, and everybody says this is an important priority. Second thing is the business community was telling the mayor and the city council, you need to do this, we're having difficulty time getting workers. Right? We have a woman who runs a really nice cleaning company. They clean offices, use all natural products. They pay $15 an hour, which is above market wage. She can't get enough workers because if someone's living way over in Fitchburg or Monona, I mean, what do you do when the weather's like this or your car breaks down, right? So I think the third lesson was when you call it workforce housing, there's a little bit of an education because people don't know what that term means. But it helps people understand these are people who are working, they're already living in your community, these are our neighbors, our friends, they send their kids to school. I think the fourth thing was that you start small and build on success. And so some of the initial kind of townhouses with Habitat in Amherst Road, what replaced it was good looking, helped reduce police calls, helped get buy-in. The fifth lesson, which is, I'll be careful how I say this, because we have current issues in front of us, is that a lot of the developments that were successful with TIF and affordable housing happen to be located not adjacent to existing single family. So I don't want to say that that's a lesson is to always avoid adjacent to single family, but it tends to make it easier. So we're dealing with this issue right now because we have that University Avenue corridor, right? Which is not great, which would be a great place because it's high capacity for transit, transportation, and employment. It's a great place for higher density units with affordability mixed in. But it butts up right against some single family neighborhoods that have objected to many of the development proposals. So part of the lesson I think other communities are learning is if you're going to make high density, right, like more than 50 units in a building, those are best located in areas with good transit, maybe in areas near jobs. We've tried to locate them near job centers, near the mall, near transit stations. But there's plenty of opportunities for what you call missing middle, right? Housing in existing neighborhoods, maybe a granny flat or an accessory dwelling, or maybe a fourplex on a corner. As we design our neighborhoods, our new neighborhoods, we ensure that there's always a range of housing choices. So if you look at our newer neighborhood, north on High Road, you'll see there's some larger lot singles, some really small lot singles, some townhouses, multifamily. So we're really talking about, for new neighborhoods, kind of this idea of a complete neighborhood, a range of types in the same development. Does that answer your question? I think we'll have more time for Q&A later. We will.
While we queue up the second presentation, if you could take a minute to look at your reflection sheet and just so that the recall is still there, write down any ideas that Kurt has presented that might work for Waunakee that really feels like possibilities or good ideas for this community. Yeah, we'll just, he's gonna go first and then I'll do that. You just compare when it's done.
All right, our next speaker is Tom Landgraft. Tom, we did introductions earlier today, and so I'm going to turn the floor right over to you, and thank you very much for being here tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. I was a little worried I wasn't going to get here. Lots of water in the streets over here, and I kept getting detoured further and further away. So eventually I got to where I wanted to be. I'm just pulling over a few. In the interest of time, I condensed this down to talk about two things. One is from a development standpoint, what drives developers need to talk to communities about some financial assistance in their development proposal if they are contemplating doing anything less than market rate. So if you're looking for market rate quality but less than market rate rent, that typically results in some sort of a discussion between the community and the developer as to how that gap gets filled. So I'm focusing on that, and then if there's time, I've got a couple of items in here that address some of the issues that Kurt was talking about. The housing cost burdened families, one way obviously to address that burden, in other words, they're spending too much on housing because there isn't enough affordable housing. There's a fairly long lead time to get housing developed. If you had all the money today, between zoning and planning and other things, you're probably not going to be leasing up for a year and a half, 2 years by the time that property is stabilized. So is there anything that can be done in the interim that might help the cost burden for families that isn't new housing? So got a couple of thoughts on that as well. One of the things that's always interesting is to here we go, is to learn from history, because what you're all talking about and what developers are focusing on right now isn't the first time this has popped up in the U.S. And I thought I'd take you just back in time. We're not going to go through all of these, but you can see there was quite a bit of stuff going on in the early 30s. Creation of stock exchanges, securities regulation, public utility regulation. The lead-off item there is the Federal Home Loan Bank System, and you saw in Kurt's list of funding sources on all of those affordable housing developments, there was Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, which is part of that Federal Home Loan Bank system. That's one of the largest grant programs around to help developers do housing, and that comes out of the program that was created back in 1932. You can see Fannie Mae coming along here and Freddie Mac. The Public Housing Act of 1937 created what is referred to as public housing. That's a capital P, capital H. That's a type of housing. We can learn a lot from what Congress did in the 1937 Act. There's still public housing around. You don't have any here in Waunakee, but you do have some housing funded by a program that started in 1949, which is the Section 515 program, rural development. That's Village Glen Apartments financed with that program. So this one hasn't had a lot of new money for housing. There hasn't been any new money for public housing since the late 60s. So those programs are basically just maintaining the stuff they built. There's no new money coming through them. But the reason I've got them on the list is we can go back and look at what was done with those programs and see if there's some ways we can look at doing some things today. And then, of course, there's the granddaddy of all of these. Came out of the '86 Tax Act. That's the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, or LIHTC as it's referred to, or Section 42 of the IRS code. And all of that affordable housing that Kurt was talking about had either the 9% or the 4% LIHTC. It's exceedingly difficult, unless you've just won the lottery, to be able to pull off affordable workforce housing without the use of LIHTC and probably Federal Home Loan Bank grants. So, should have advanced, didn't. There we go. Okay, so if you take nothing away from today's discussion, you will want to put this chart under your pillow, because this is going to be the key to unlocking a lot of affordable and workforce housing issues. What this is doing is showing you the percentage of monthly rent. So just to make the math easy, let's assume this is describing an apartment that rents for $1,000 a month. So $520 of that 1,000 goes into this chunk. $100 of that 1,000 goes here, and so forth. All right. Now, public housing that was created back in 1937 does not have this blue slice. So that apartment would not rent for $1,000. It would rent for $480. The federal government put in the blue slice, so that all tenants paid was the amount for property tax, which is this slice, the amount for operations of the building, which is this slice, and a small chunk of dollars that gets tucked away to continue to have dollars to keep the property properly maintained. So and this is the debt. This is the borrowed money in the property. So if you could eliminate all of the borrowed money in a property that would rent for $1,000 a month and was built to $1,000 a month quality, it would rent for $480. Now, it's unlikely that all of this is going to come out, but a decent chunk will come out. About 70% of this disappears when you apply the low-income housing tax credit. It's a source of funds that does not increase rent, and that's why it's so popular. It's a lot of bucks, but it doesn't translate into rent. TIF would reduce a piece of this. the Federal Home Loan Bank grant reduces a piece of this. So that ultimately, this slice of the pie gets down to about 15 to 20% of the rent, not 52%. So the key to being able to deal with affordable housing and access tools that are in the marketplace is not for a developer to argue with the city about what their property taxes are. This is pretty non-negotiable. This is the cost of cutting grass and plowing snow and doing all kinds of other things. If it's market rate or affordable, the utility company charges the same for natural gas and electricity. It doesn't make any difference what somebody's income is. These are really not negotiable costs. Developers who cut back on here get angry tenants because they're not answering the phone and they're not addressing maintenance issues. So tenants move out of the buildings, and now we have big vacancies, and the development starts to swirl the bowl, as they say. So it's just a matter of time when developers start cutting back here. And when they don't fund this, then they don't have money for maintenance. And then neighbors complain, community complains. So these really, you have to have. You must have if you're going to maintain the housing. This is the one that you can make changes to that don't affect anything over here. So focus on that, because that's half a rent. That would take $1,000 a month apartment down to $480, and I'm sure at the end of the day you'd say, how many of those can we do and how fast can we get them done? So it's not an issue of building it cheap, and it's not an issue of not spending the appropriate dollars to keep it operating properly. It's how you finance it. So, I gave you a chart, lots of numbers in here. I'm not going to go through them all, but what this shows you, and you can eyeball it at your leisure, is these are both the same developments. And it's a 50-unit development, spending $180,000 a unit to build it. In today's market, that's average quality. $700,000 for the land, that's $15,000 a unit. The market rate apartment without TIF, and I don't have any TIF in here, so we're not looking at something the community can do. But the market rate version rents for $2,100. So if you were going to just do an apartment, spend this kind of money, it's about the rent you're going to have. The affordable tax credit version of this rents for $800. But you'll notice the cost is the same. So if this one had underground parking, this one has underground parking. If this one had granite countertops, this one has granite countertops. If this one had tile floor in the bathroom, this one has tile floor in the bathroom. Prior to the 1986 Tax Act, the way affordable housing was done in the United States, other than public housing, in which the government put all the money in that replaced the debt, the other way to do it was to build it cheap. So this didn't have garages. It didn't have all the things that it should have right now. It also didn't have curb appeal. So when you drive down the street, you can see these. They just pop right out at you and say, whoa, where was their head when they did that? Well, that was before people really understood there's another way to get affordability rather than building it cheap. You will not, I'm sure, be encouraging anyone to build on the cheap in Waunakee, because you're not going to want to repeat what happened prior to '86. What changed in 1986 was when the low-income housing tax credit came in, because that's the juice that makes this work. This has a $7.5 million mortgage, the blue slice. This has a $1.7 million mortgage. That line right there is what changes that rent from $2,100 to $800. So that's all the detail. When the developer tells you it doesn't pencil out, this is what they're penciling and trying to get all of this to work. Now you can get that rent even lower if you apply TIF to this. So that's basically the long and short of it as far as as far as how the financing deals with rent. So then finding cheap land, where to go, you end up, where's the cheap land right now? It's on the edge of town, and it's not where you necessarily want property. So,
Good question over here.
oh, yep.
So did that unit that had the lesser rent, was it mixed units with some regular sized rents and then some lower rents, or was it all less rent in that entire building? Which I don't think is what.
This is a 50-unit apartment building, and all 50 units were affordable.
Okay.
Now, we can set it so that it's not. If you wanted to do, I brought the model along, so if after a while you wanted to say, what would this look like if it was half market and half affordable?
Right.
We can print that real quick for you. But this is always instructive for my students, which Jocelyn was one. They look at this and say, yeah, we understand that. They look at this and say, wait a minute, how can you do the same development and charge $800 when you're charging $2,100 here? That does not compute. It makes no sense. Spending less or charging less rent can't possibly get you the same deal, because everybody over here would be doing the same thing. The issue is these people are at 60% of the county median or less. These people are above 60% of the county median or less. That's the cutoff piece of it. So, the other thing that I also thought I would just mention is it would be great if you could just waltz into WIDA and say, hey, we're here, we need some tax credits, here's our needs, and that's that. The affordable housing tax credit nationally is substantially oversubscribed. In Wisconsin, there's about 3 times as many applications for the credit as get the credit. So there's a very intense scoring process, and anyone in the room here who has worked with developers or been part of it, they're always talking about points, because everything that WIDA does is about points. And that's not just because it's WIDA, but that's what Congress wants to do. So if we all decided, no, we're not going to do housing in Waunakee, we want to go out to Denver, Colorado, and we want to access the low-income housing tax credit out there, how do we do that? How can we find out information? And the law requires that every state issue a QAP, it's a qualified allocation plan, is what they want to do with the credits, and every state has to issue a scoring criteria. It's called the SSE. It would be like me giving Jocelyn the exam and the answers. And if she doesn't get an A, that means she didn't memorize. Right. So every state tells every developer, if you want tax credits, score high. And here's the scoring criteria. It's different in all 50 states. But that's basically how it works. So that's why when you hear people talking about points, and we need TIF to get points, and we need this, and we need that, and you guys have to pay for the sewer, and the curb cut and all that, it's all about points and financial participation in the property. And the other thing, when you as a community look at planning, I mean, you've got at the center of it where people live and all of the things that are associated with it. This is a graphic representation of something that's called a walk score. If you're not familiar with it, www.walkscore, put in your address, and you're going to get a number. And then put in a couple of other addresses as in Waunakee, and you're going to get some different numbers. And what it's doing in one number is it's telling you what's the relationship of all of this to the address that you dialed in. And walk scores are a big deal. And WIDA wants them to be a big deal. This is the point scoring in Wisconsin. These are all the possible points you can get. You generally need about, now they've changed it a little, probably about 230, 240 points to be guaranteed you're going to get the credits. You can see the 2 highest categories on this list are serves lowest income residents. That's what Kurt was talking about. The people that are down at the 30 and 40% of the county median income. So WIDA basically says if you as a developer stay up all night trying to figure out how to get your deal done, to have more of those lower income people than higher income people will reward you with points. I don't know of any developer who will get tax credits in Wisconsin in any cycle that won't be maxing those 60 points out. So what's the second highest point category on this chart? Right here, financial leverage. Another way to say this is financial support from the local community. That's why your developers always talking about, I need something from Waunakee. If you want me to do housing, you got to help me because I can't show up and not get these points. This is also where the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago money comes in. It's where the 515 rural development money comes in. So those programs that have been around since the early 30s factor into this story today. This is where you have a lot of negotiating and bargaining posture with developers, the way Middleton basically did it. The big difference in Middleton and a lot of other places is instead of letting me as a developer wander around Waunakee and find a couple pieces of land and come in and pitch the city and say, well, it'd be really great to do this 50-unit housing deal, Middleton basically said here, 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 and here. You want to pick something other than those 4 sites, you're on your own. You show up and do something on one of these sites, we're going to get you to the head of the line. And we're going to help you with this. So it's your decision, developer. What do you want to do? So identifying land, telling developers ahead of time, don't waste your time over here. Spend some time over here. And in a lot of cases now, communities are actually going out and buying the land and basically saying, we own it. Now we're just going to have a little beauty contest here and we're going to pick the best developer and the best proposal that comes in, and that's who's going to get to submit the tax credit application. That land counts as financial leverage as well. So it's a matter of how much out front you want to get on the process. But at the end of the day, this is where the rubber hits the road. And you're going to need low-income housing tax credits to really drive the rent down. And the goal will be for every community in the state to figure out what we can do to help with some of these points. But this is the big one right here. And as you can see, it's the second largest set of points. So that tells you that's where WIDA is weighting the scoring. And this translates into the blue slice that we looked at on the first chart. So that's how they link together. So at the end of the day, it isn't rocket science. It's very straightforward. You're not arguing about granite countertops. You're arguing or thinking about what can we do as a community to help package something up to get what we want, to get really good housing for the folks that are going to live there, and at the same time get the developer as high up on, as close as they can get to the 40, because that's really, at the end of the day, where it ends up. Most developers are very good at getting as many points here as you can. What separates the winning and losing tax credit proposals will be financial leverage and readiness to proceed. This is zoning. So if you actually have zoning, which means you've gone through the city process, you've gone through the neighborhood meetings, you've gone through all the rest of it, you get those 12 points. If you have a letter from the city saying, yeah, you give them tax credits, we'll get zoning across the finish line, you get 6 points. Those 6 could be the difference between the deal getting funded or not. And where is it easiest to get the zoning done? It's those 4 sites that the city picked because they know they can do that. They've already done the research. They know the neighborhood. They know everything else. They know if developer works with us on this site, we can do it. Now, you can speed it even more by actually owning the site and getting a zone. And then you got these 12 points right out of the box. So the things that the developers really need from the community, you can either wait for them to ask, or you can do an about face and say, we got it. Now what we want to do is get your idea on what's the best thing to do on that site. And that's where your competition will probably have a time. 2 more minutes. Okay. The last two things, last couple things that I have in the handout are 2 items, and I'll just mention them to you in the interest of time. One is, when you look at what people spend money on, especially families, child care is a big deal. It's a huge amount of money, and I put in a couple of charts. You can see that if you're going to send a child to a state licensed full-family child care center, it's about what you spend for tuition at the University of Wisconsin. So, kid in child care for a year, $10,000 in the child's tuition account. Unless you have a lot of money, it's going to be one or the other. And it shows you the percentage of, if people did it, the percentage that they would spend of their income in child care. Kurt was talking about what they spend for housing. This is what's putting that into the child care concept. This is a chart. It shows all of the licensed, state licensed family, meaning 8 kids or less, somebody who lives child care out of their home basically, and the group child care centers. You can see in Dane County there's 21,000 kids that are in one of those 2 child care centers, 464 child care centers in Dane County, either in people's homes, of which there are 185, or 279, which is the traditional child care center you see. You can see over here how many are open past 6:30. That's in the whole county. How many people live in Waunakee that work past 6:30 and are a single parent? What do they do for child care? Helping relieve that burden for a single parent might be a better deal for them and a quicker solution to their family financial budget than applying for low-income housing tax credits on a property that isn't going to come online for 2 years. Because a child care center could get built and started very quickly for a lot less money. And if the village was going to help with that, they could say to me, the potential operator that would be in the building that the village is going to build and lease to me, you got to be open past 6:30. Figure out how to make that work. Because we got a lot of people here. And if they're driving into Madison to work in the big box, they're not going to get back here until 10:30 or 11. So there's an opportunity here. Child care costs you a lot less than housing if you were really going to put that on the map quickly. Because you don't have WEDA, you don't have anything else. You basically have you and zoning and the operator. The second thing that I put in is on utility costs. Utility costs in child care are must-do things. If you have kids, you have to have somebody take care of them. And if you use electric and gas, you're going to pay somebody for electric and gas, or you're going to get it disconnected. One way to help reduce the family's utility bill, the cheapest and fastest way to get that done is solar on the roof. And Middleton has a program, Madison has a program. I've got a couple of my classes working on how to put a manual together for a community. And if you wanted to stick solar on somebody's roof, especially the person that's in a single family home, that older adult who's struggling to stay in the house, if you can reduce their utility bill by putting some solar on the roof, that might be just what they need. They don't need a different house, they don't need anything else. They just need to pay PG&E less for electric and gas. So I put that in as well. The last thing I would just mention that you see in there are some snippets from something called the Dream Up competition. Kurt and I, Jim McGurl, one of Kurt's counterparts, and a bunch of the heavyweights of the county worked on putting together a program that was sponsored by Schmidt Foundation. Nationally, Schmidt is the former CEO, Chief Operating Officer of Gould. And so he and his wife have a big foundation, and they funded some project competitions in 4 states. And we worked on a county proposal. One of the things that was, and you'll see that in there, there's childcare and solar, surprise, surprise, and also affordable housing. But one of the things that we looked at on the affordable housing thing that might be something for you to also crank into your thought process is the buildings that Kurt showed you are big. Those are 50 and 60 unit properties. Where would you put those in Waunakee? You're not going to put those in a neighborhood with a lot of single family homes, or there'll be a lot of people saying, wait a minute, can't do that. But could you put a 24 or 30 unit, or maybe even a 12 unit in that neighborhood? Residents might say, yeah. Developer will tell you, can't make the economy work, gotta have 50 or 60 units. Well, what if there was a program where we could take 3 development proposals at 20 units each, put them together as a 60 unit, and market that to the tax credit investor and the lender? Then there's economy of scale. And that's also how things would get done in the communities that are like Belleville, which is 2,400, instead of Waunakee, which is 12,000. So in addition to the program that would work to accumulate small developments in smaller communities, it could also work to say, yeah, we need 60 units of affordable housing in Waunakee, but let's do it in 3 20-unit developments that we could potentially put in single-family neighborhoods or on the edges of single-family neighborhoods where 60 units would just not work, but 20 might, maybe 15. And that's one of the things that we're continuing to talk about with the county to see if there's some way to maybe work with the Dane County Housing Authority to sponsor an umbrella application. We've already talked to WIDA about it. I can send links to Kristen. WIDA has actually gone out and done that concept up in Barron County, where they're going to help a lot of small developers put a bigger deal together that can then get marketed, but it's multiple sites. So that might be something you want to think about as well.
So we'll hear some ideas about those smaller units. Anyone need to stretch, feel free to do so whenever if you need to walk out, we're going to just keep going. Oh, yeah. We need to close the room. Once again, write down anything that you heard from Tom that could be applicable to Waunakee.
I should be able to.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Greg Rosenberg. For the past 30 years, I've been involved with fair housing and affordable housing issues. Many of those years spent working with community land trust. I've also been very involved in co-housing, which is kind of a related concept to community land trust, but a bit different. Because of the limited amount of time, I can't give you the whole overview of the community land trust model. And so instead I wanted to focus on a project I'm working on this All right, hold on. 1 second. All right. Set that up and let's use my computer. All right, let's try that again. So anyway, I thought it would be most useful to talk about a live project that's currently in motion that really kind of gives you a sense of what's involved in the development of a co-housing project. Within it, it's got elements that are coming to community land trust, such as permanent affordability, as well as most community participation. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through this. All right, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to co-housing, give you an overview of our project, which is called Co-Home Madison, talk a little bit about design that is unique to co-housing, give you a little bit of a sense of how popular our project is from a marketing perspective, the range of pricing that you would see in a mixed income project. Then I want to talk about affordability and how we're creating it. This is owner-occupied housing, so it's a whole different landscape than it is going to be for affordable rental housing, as well as a different target market, because we're focused on folks at 80% below. So these are folks who do have higher incomes than what you would see in a low-income housing tax credit project. So, anybody here ever heard of co-housing before? Okay. So it's a form of intentional community that was imported to the U.S. From Denmark in the late 1980s. A couple architects from Berkeley, California played a big role in bringing that over. And it looks to strike a balance between personal privacy and community. So what you'll see is shared community spaces as well as individual units. So you have kind of the best of both worlds. So it's not a legal structure. It's really a social overlay that can work over a variety of legal structures. Typically in the U.S., it's been an overlay on condominiums, and that's been a real challenge for co-housing the last 10 years because of the collapse of the condominium market in many cities around the U.S. So the other thing it does is it incorporates design, an approach to physical design that facilitates community. And again, that's looking at shared community spaces. So this is a map from a few years ago that just shows projects in motion, projects completed. Co-housing has a fairly high failure rate, in large part because groups don't have site control and they don't hire development consultants. And if you're doing it yourself and you don't have land, it's a pretty difficult thing to do. But if you have land and consultants, chances of success are much higher. So today, approximately 140 completed, 149 in process. So in Madison, we've got 3. The first one was Village Co-Housing. Art and Sue Lloyd played a really critical role in making that happen. It was the inspiration for that project. They sunk a lot of their money into it. That's over by Meriter Hospital. The next one was Troy Gardens, a project I was very involved in. We have Carrie here from Troy Gardens as well, and it's where I met Sharon many years ago. And then the third project was Arboretum Co-Housing. It's near St. Mary's Hospital. And from a physical design perspective, it's very similar to ours. So there's kind of 5 key defining characteristics of co-housing I just want to go through quickly. The first is participatory process. People design their own housing, all right? We have a 45-unit building, which is quite large for co-housing. So just imagine collaboratively designing a building with 45 households, which is a lot of people. So it's a very powerful process to collaboratively design, and it takes a lot of work that you have a coherent process to do so. And a lot of it is educating them so they can make good decisions, right? So, the other thing is designing to facilitate community. The other thing we pay a lot of attention to is designing to respect the existing neighborhood, which is why we stayed at 3 stories instead of 4, because that we knew would be well received by the neighborhood. Common spaces, and I'll show you what we have in our building, but typically includes a common kitchen, a large multi-purpose room that serves as a dining room and event room, living room areas, workshops, kids' playrooms, shared laundry, and guest rooms. And guest rooms are very important because it means you don't have to have a spare bedroom. So it means you can live in a smaller unit and reduce your cost of living. Typically, co-housing is largely self-managed. The better, because these are folks who are looking to pitch in and work together, and that means your ongoing operating costs can be lower than what you would see in a typical condominium. And co-housing groups typically work by consensus. So meetings can go on for a while. But we've gotten good at it. We've got, we move quickly, and one of the key things about co-housing is you got to give people deadlines and they'll make decisions. And that's one thing I do. So this is our building. This is a corner of Sutherland Court and Winnebago Street on Madison's near east side. So for folks who know Madison, this is Shinks Corners. This is East Washington right here. That's East High School over there. So it's it's definitely close into the city. Shinks Corners is maybe the hottest neighborhood in Madison from a development perspective. So it's there's a lot going on there right now, and prices are spiking now. So our project has gotten relatively more affordable since we started. This was the existing site. I had not done a project on a brownfield site before. I'd done greenfield projects, which are much, much easier. So this was the site of Winnebago Studios, a well-loved artist studio space. This was Madison Circus Space, Circus Performance Arts Center, Sector 67, a maker space, and Dr. Sachs was in there and some other warehouse space. And so we had to take all those buildings down to do this project, which was quite complex. And just wanted to show you what the building will look like when it's done. So it's a mixture of brick and corrugated metal facing the street. And then as we move into the back, we shift to metal and fiber cement board because of cost-saving measure. And there's a rear courtyard that's not detailed here. And underground parking has been very important to people. And so what you're not seeing there is kind of the rest of the neighborhood and then how it fits in. We got no pushback whatsoever from the neighborhood, nothing but positive support because we really work collaboratively with them in that regard. And here's our site right now. Drones are really cool. So, yeah, so they're just beginning the second story here. There's actually going to be a Madison Circus space. You can see the footprint for their building here coming back in next door. You can kind of see the courtyard area here. And you can kind of get a sense, imagine a 3-story building set in that neighborhood where you've got 2 or 3-story structures. So overall, this is a 3-story, 64,000 square foot building, a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. We had set a goal initially of 50% affordable. We had to retreat back to 25%, and that was perversely complex, even to hit that. And so 11 of the 45 units are designated for buyers at or below 80% of area median income. One thing just to point out is that in the last 10 years, there's been virtually no affordable owner-occupied multifamily housing in Madison, like 0. I think Arboretum Co-Housing may have been the last one, and that's a 10-year gap. And so when we did this project, we had to restart things that had not been in play for 10 years. So we had to kind of reinvent the wheel, because condo development now is radically different than 10 years ago. We have all the common areas that you would want to see in a co-housing project. We have underground parking. Each unit gets 1 space, and we have a few extra. And now people are realizing you can't have underground parking and lots of storage. And so I told them that before, but now they're realizing. And then we were also able to create space for 9 artist studios on the first floor so that we can make room for the displaced artists from Winnebago Studios. And in the co-housing world, we're a bit of an unusual approach. You would either typically see a co-housing group of maybe a dozen households, and they would self-finance the development process, which is a very difficult thing and requires some folks with substantial assets to move it forward. Or a developer might come in and do a project and just market it to the community. What we did is that we have a partnership. Coho Madison is a non-stock corporation representing interested buyers. These are the members of Coho Madison. And we partner with the Sipiter Properties that own the property where it's being developed. And they're serving as the developer. They're the folks who are putting up the money for covering pre-development and development expenses, signing the construction loan, signing the construction contract. And that's Adam Churd and John Young, and they've been fantastic to work with. And so from the Sipiter's perspective, one way they look at this is it's a condo project where we're managing their risk because we're bringing buyers to them. So by the time the building's done, there'll be offers to purchase on all 45 units. And so they're not wearing the risk of finishing a building and not having time. Our timeline is we're under construction. And hopefully finishing up September, October is a bit of a brutal time for construction, as you can tell right now. The weather has been very challenging. We're still in the process of marketing a few remaining units and also hoping to encourage folks to get on the waiting list because we do have some attrition as we move forward. And then folks moving in September to November. So I just wanted to go over design for a sec. So here's another view of the building here. And so you can see it's got private balconies and porches. We feel like it's a handsome building that will certainly be a big upgrade from the corrugated metal building that was there before. This is our site plan here. So you can see the L-shaped building here. And then this is Madison Circus Space. If you go there now, you'll see the steel structure. And it's very, very tall because it needs to accommodate flying trapeze. And so this is the world's only mixed income co-housing artist studio and circus performance space project. So there you go. I'm quite confident of that. So I just wanted to show you what the first floor common areas look like. And that's this area that's outlined here. And then over here just is going to be the 9 artist studio. So the common house will have a large room, a great room here. It's designed to accommodate everybody who lives in the building to share a room. That's just kind of how we size it. These will be folding tables that can be put away, so you can use it for all kinds of purposes. There's going to be a shared community kitchen here where people can prepare meals together, they can carry, what have you. There's a kids' playroom here, a living room / music room up top, a craft room here, table storage. Can't forget that one. That actually has gotten bigger. And then we have a fitness room and shared laundry. And the shared laundry is important. We'll have that on all 3 floors because a lot of folks would rather use that than have that in their units. And on the upper floors, we have this area right here in the notch of the L, which has just a little teeny tiny window access. So we program that as part of the common spaces as well because it does not work for a residential unit. And so on the second floor, there'll be a lounge area, an office for the co-housing association, shared laundry, and then a guest room. And this would be just kind of a hotel-style studio unit. And then on the floor above, we have space to have a 2-bedroom suite. These are not just for folks visiting from out of town, but it could be kids coming over for sleepovers and whatnot. As of today, 41 of 45 are under contract, 6 months prior to completion. So we're still converting reservations to offers to purchase, which has been a time-consuming process. We have 4 market rate units still available to purchase. And we're encouraging people, like I said, to get on the waiting list just so folks drop out. That we'll have ready buyers to take their place. You don't have to digest this. This is just to give you a sense. So our pricing ranges from $166,000 to $389,000, which is affordable relative to the marketplace, but still a lot of money at $166,000. But when you factor in the different forms of subsidy that we bring to the table, we're able to push those first mortgages down on affordable units down to $102,000, which 20 years ago would have been a lot of money, but is considered affordable in the Madison marketplace right now. So in some ways, the affordability was our biggest challenge, maybe other than the site remediation work. And so we have 11 affordable units. So first, they're being discounted $26,000 each. And that's a combination of our market rate buyers paying more and our development partners reducing their developer fee, which is typically not something that a developer would do. And then we needed to put together additional layers of subsidy to push that first mortgage amount down. So we were able to secure $36,000 per unit for 11 units from the city of Madison. That is dedicated specifically to our project. It's what's called the soft second. So technically it is a loan, but it stays silently in place until you sell your home or in the event of a cash out refinance. And so really, from a monthly housing expense, it is invisible. You will notice it when you sell your home, but not when you're in your home. And then there's Federal Home Loan Bank has a down payment plus program. So for lenders who are members, they can get $6,000, which is forgivable over 5 years. This is a great, great program. And then the third layer is the City of Madison has a first-time home buyer program called Home Buy the American Dream, and that's another $20,000 in soft second financing. What's interesting is first-time home buyer has a specific definition. It's either somebody who hasn't owned in the last 3 years or a single parent with a dependent minor child. So that's why I put the definition out there. Now, one of the big issues, and this now harkens back to the community land trust model, is that one of the things that community land trust did in the U.S. is raised awareness around permanent affordability. And a lot of affordability historically was lost at the first resale, or else people just figured you want to keep things affordable for 30 years. Well, 30 years later, you can lose your housing stock, and that's what happened in Maryland, for example, because that 30 years expired and they saw the loss of stock. So we are going to be implementing what's called a resale price formula. And I just wanted to show you the math a little bit. So if you purchase your home for $180,000 and you sell it after 10 years, what we do is that you can get an annual increase in appreciation of your home equivalent to the average increase in the median income. Because we want this resale price to track changes in median income so folks at 80% or below in 10 years can still afford this. There's one nonprofit in Madison that did index their formula properly, and the houses became too expensive to sell to eligible buyers, and they actually had to return those properties to the city. So in this case, 1.5% is the average. I need to calculate that, but just for grins, and work the math, it's $208,897. You want to set it up in a way so that the current owner can figure out what they can sell that home for. There's some appraisal-based formulas for those. And then, this is my last slide. And then this is just the income eligibility. Are you part of the Madison metro area out here?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, so then these are your numbers as well. Those have gone up quite a bit since I first started working in this area. And then here's our website. So if you have any interest in learning more about co-housing, we have a lot of information there. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm Greg at gregrosenberg.com. And that's it.
Quick question, Greg?
Yes.
Quick question. You went on something really quick in my hearing loss. Hearing loss stopped me from being able to hear it. You said something about the risk being mitigated for the developer. That's the piece I don't quite, I mean, that's a pretty good sized risk to buy the land, dig the hole, start putting up the building.
Right, but we're not eliminating risk. But the way our construction lender and Monona Bank framed it, he said, all right, so we're doing a construction loan where you're going to essentially have 100% of the units sold before the building's done. And so from his perspective, as a construction lender, you've eliminated almost all of his risk. So there's still the risk that you would have in any project, but you're eliminating the risk of finishing a building and being stuck with unsold units and having to carry those over time.
But who carries the risk if it's not, those are not sold?
Well, my job is to make sure that they are. And 41 out of 45 under contract 6 months before closing, I think we're really well positioned.
It sounds like you're doing it well. I just would, somebody's got to sign up for what if that doesn't happen?
Yeah, so it's a great model, but then you have to execute properly.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do, we're going to have Ann come up, do the last presentation, and yet another innovative way to create housing. And then we'll have all 4 of our speakers up here in chairs, and you can ask any questions, and they might have a conversation amongst themselves of what options they see for this community. So we'll have Ann come on up.
Ask you a question. There's a fellow by the name of Lee that comes here every day.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, the middle one's a sophomore.
Okay. So I can tell him I can see what he's talking about.
Right.
Yeah. You know, it was like,
Yeah.
Good.
yeah. Yeah.
All right, Lord is yours, Ann. Thank you. Thank you.
So the last of many speakers, and it's so great to see that lovely lake outside. Reflected in the light. So yes, I'm Ann Reynolds. I was the director of the Center for Cooperatives for many years at the University of Wisconsin. So did a lot of work with housing cooperatives. Very glad to be here to introduce or tell you a little bit more about the topic. There aren't a lot of housing co-ops in Wisconsin. There are some, and they range. It's a very flexible model, so there's a lot of different types. But as you probably know, major metropolitan areas, particularly New York City, have a lot of housing cooperatives. There's some very successful ones in Chicago, and there are some here in Wisconsin. So I'm going to give you an overview, but maybe in the Q&A, if you're interested in some specific examples, I'd be glad to talk about it. So it's an innovative model, but it's one actually with a long history in some communities. And in fact, in Madison, there are some very venerable housing cooperatives that have been around for a very, very long time. And there's places in the world, including like Oslo, Norway, where housing cooperatives provide almost, most of the housing for middle-income people. So, but it is unusual enough that I'm very glad to be here just to give you a short introduction to the model. So that you can include it in your decision making. Sorry. So I go there. Yeah. Okay. So let's just start with the housing co-op. And thanks so much, Greg, for that great description of the co-housing that's actually a block away from me. So I was kind of glad to hear more details. But as we go through this, I can kind of use that project as an example. What would it be like if it was a co-op? So the biggest thing to remember is that it's not a condo. Co-ops are usually multifamily housing that are not structured as condominiums. Residents don't actually directly own the real estate. The real estate is owned by a corporation, and cooperatives are corporations. In Wisconsin, a housing co-op would organize under state law, Chapter 185, and just like any other cooperative. And when a resident moves into a unit, they buy a share in the corporation, which gives them the legal right to live in a particular unit, and then includes other rules through an occupancy agreement. That's a little bit like a rental agreement and a little bit like a condo association agreement. So what does that do? It does lower closing costs tremendously. And it also means that ownership leads of a share, and which allows you to stay in a unit, leads to a voice in how the housing corporation is organized and run. And just like in Greg's co-housing, there are often features in cooperatives that encourage community. Because it's very important that if we all live together, we also get to know each other, and that will ease the way decisions are made. So members are democratically elected, and they're responsible for managing that corporation, which means setting aside the adequate reserves, making sure that the building is well taken care of, making sure that marketing is done well and efficiently, and that the building is filled. And a lot of that work is like being on any other board of any corporation, where you create a budget, hire management, approve members, those kinds of things. For you who are, you're thinking about, okay, what can we do to provide housing here in Waunakee and I know, I could tell, with a particular emphasis on affordability. It's really important to know that with co-ops, the financial structure is really, really flexible. You can do just about anything you'd like within the cooperative model. Because the members pay, the price that the members pay for their share of the corporation can range from the price of a security deposit on a rental to the full value of the unit. So it runs the gamut. The appreciation of the equity also can run the gamut from almost no appreciation allowed to something like Greg described, which is where the appreciation in this case was tied to the average income gains in the looking forward 10 years, or it could be the consumer price index, or it could be something in between. Those are limited equity co-ops, so the amount of appreciation is limited. That then, of course, creates permanent affordability. Or it could just be market value, like a condominium, where the owner goes out on the market and gets whatever they can for the unit. So lots and lots of decisions that can be made depending on your target audience and what you're trying to accomplish with this housing. The cooperative corporation has a master lease, and depending how much they've needed to borrow, so again, they may have taken advantage of low-income tax credits and be on the low end of their debt load. That master lease then, the costs then are divided among the members as part of the carrying charge, depending on the size of the units. And then another important thing is that even though members don't own real property, they are able to deduct the property tax that is that the cooperative corporation pays for the entire property from their income taxes. So there's a way to do that. I mean, there's forms that can be used to do that. So just quickly, there are a lot of different types of co-op, just like there's a lot of financing options, cooperatives exist in almost any type of housing you can think of. So multifamily dwelling units, certainly, scattered site. There was quite a large cooperative in Milwaukee called Westside Housing that was a scattered site house cooperative. So the cooperative corporation owns, say, 3 or 4 houses on a variety of blocks. And that is a tricky one because it's not possible to create some of those community elements that Greg showed us in the co-housing when people are living in their individual homes. But there's also an island up in Minneapolis, I can't remember the name of it, where many of the houses on this particular island right downtown in Minneapolis are part of a cooperative scattered site housing unit. So resident-owned manufacturing housing parks, we have a couple of those in Wisconsin. New Hampshire has led the nation in developing those, and if you have a mobile home park in the area and the owner is about to sell it and destroy a lot of your affordable housing, which happens in many communities, get in touch, because there is a process for converting very successfully those parks to cooperatives. Senior apartments, that's a whole nother area that actually in Minnesota has been extremely popular, and we have some examples here in Wisconsin. And then shared space community housing, lastly. In Madison, when I'm talking to groups, that's what most people think co-ops are. I think it's a kind of a student organized house with a shared kitchen. It's a great model, but it isn't the most typical model for housing cooperatives. So we talked a little bit about some of the benefits. Cooperatives do build community. They are stable. There are studies comparing nonprofit affordable housing with cooperative affordable housing in New York City, and cooperatives build what's called social capital. You know, they build community. People know their neighbors. They watch over each other because they're sort of forced to through this democratic process. And another study in Chicago showed that the stability of living in a cooperative contributed to much less transients and evictions, and kids stayed in school and neighborhoods longer. So cooperatives have those benefits when compared to other forms of affordable housing. But like, you know, condos now, I mean, particularly in the 70s, most of us know what a condo is. It may not be as popular as it once was, but the model is definitely not well understood, so marketing can be an issue. Just as Greg said with the co-housing, that needs a very strong development team. Property managers need to be educated to understand that the people that live in the cooperative are owners, not renters. And then governance is really, really important. And so, again, the kind of assistance to the board that makes for a strong management is really, really critical. And there is help out there for that kind of a thing. There is also specialized financing and specialized technical assistance available. So if you have any interest in following up with this, we can definitely put you in touch with National Co-op Bank, Capital Impact Partners, other organizations that specialize in this. And in fact, WIDA here in Wisconsin is interested in cooperative housing. So, you know, there's help out there. We don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but I'm really glad to have a chance to introduce you to the model. And if you have questions, then maybe we'll move on to the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay. We have on our agenda that we're going to move straight into the Q&A. Everyone ready for that? Mm-hmm. All right. Once again, feel free to walk around if you need to. Let's pull up 4 chairs and have our speakers come up. And if you all don't have any questions, the speakers get to ask questions of each other.
Street that's been there for a long, long time. It is about a 6 or 8 unit down on sort of toward downtown, Ridgeway, I think it's called, and it really, they have a small fund. They target low-income residents. They have a small fund, so if I want to join that co-op, I have about a $4,000 down payment. And so when I leave, there's an appreciation to that down payment. So but it's essentially like a forced savings account rather than a mortgage. So that model actually has been, you know, extremely successful. It's a good example of flexibility. The other one is what's called Madison Community Co-op, and it's a network of community, shared community cooperatives. And out of that, they've been able to buy additional units and really preserve affordability in downtown and student areas. So that's a real success too. Yeah.
Give you this, just here. You don't have to.
Okay. I
want to make sure everyone.
Okay. I realize that different communities have different obstacles or things that they have to work on to be able to get housing projects such as this going and get them off the ground. My first part of the question is the fact that Waunakee is an affluent community, does that affect the type of money that can be received? And also, what type of hurdles do you see us possibly having as far as the community goes?
I'll start. So there's no restriction on what community can get tax credits. In fact, a more suburban affluent job center would probably score higher on many of those locational criteria because there is the desire from WIDA and a lot of tax credit allocating agencies not just to put units in central cities, but to spread them around into higher opportunity suburbs. So some of those scores that Tom showed include the quality of the school district and the like. But because you don't have transit, you would lose some points on that. In the same way that other programs from the county, like the County Affordable Housing Development Fund or the federal program Home, your community would qualify. Now the difficulty is, of course, as a more affluent community, is that the land costs are going to be a little higher, and that might make a development project not cost out without something like TIF or those sort of subsidies.
Thank you.
But I think the greatest challenge that you would have is actually, you can examine your zoning code and see whether small 4-unit co-op or 8-unit of a housing complex, or like a small lot single on like 4,000 or 6,000 square feet, or townhouses, whether those are even developable by right under your zoning ordinance. So one of the places to start, we didn't talk a lot about zoning, is make these types of smaller, more flexible development projects available by right. Whether it's accessory dwelling units, an 8-plex on a corner lot, that's probably where you're going to see more of this. And then I know you've done some projects on Main Street that look pretty.
The most difficult thing for a real estate developer is zoning, neighborhood acceptance, and getting it through the entitlement process in the community. When you are successful at getting tax credits, the investors call you, so you don't have to go looking for equity. There are enough lenders, and the housing tax credit program has been around long enough, so you have plenty of options, plus WIDA is a big lender. I mean, my sense is if you identified 3 or 4 sites that I mean, in a perfect world, that you owned and were already zoned, you'd have a traffic jam in this city with developers trying to figure out how to put something together that addresses your issue. And when you do something like that, you open the door to medium to smaller developers that don't have the balance sheet to go buy a piece of land and cross their fingers that they can get the zoning through. And that's one of the reasons that there's always a conflict. I go buy a piece of land, or I put it under contract from Kurt, and then I show up at the village and say, this is what I want to do. And somebody at the village says, well, why are you doing it on Kurt's property? You should be over here. And I'd say, well, I can't talk about that. Here's where I've got my money right now. So my entire focus is on getting that piece of dirt developed. If you owned a piece of dirt and said, come on in and talk to us, now you can get a lot of medium to small size developers. You might even get some king size general contractors who would come in and say, I got it. You know, I can put this together. I don't have to worry about, putting a lot of money on the table to put land under contract. And it makes it a lot easier to get what you want where you want it. And I think those are the 2 issues. Where you want it is typically what the developer tells you they want to do, and they've already identified the site. It's difficult to talk them out of it. And then what you want is sometimes difficult to get the developer to agree to, because they had a pro forma, like I showed you, of a certain number of units in a certain location, and now you want them to change it and their numbers don't work. So that's why there's kind of this conflict. You can eliminate that by just identifying where you want, what you want, and just basically advertise it. But I mean, I have no doubt that you would be awash with people interested, because the fact that you even did that is some of those 40 points up there. And any community that isn't doing it, now you've got a, you know, you're notched up, or ratcheted up from those other communities. So why would a developer go look at community X here? They'll come and look at your community because you're getting them points. And at time is money, so if you can get this done sooner and the developer doesn't have to get a lot of people really upset with them, like the neighborhood and other folks, I mean, this is an ideal development scenario.
How much, what kind of cost does the village carry to do that? There's quite a bit of speculation about the time that they're spending to get that approval, get the dirt, clear the houses, whatever needs to happen, there's investment, right?
Well, you might not spend any more. I mean, if I find the site and I come to you and I want TIF, or if you buy the site and you use the TIF that my development will generate to pay you back for buying the site, but you don't have to give me the TIF because I don't have to buy the site, you already have it. So I think it's not like adding more to it, it's just a question of who's incurring the cost. What's beneficial on the scenario of you doing it, you being the community, is that you've also eliminated all of the questions on local acceptance. You know, because that's a big thing for me. When this is a neighborhood association and you introduce me and I'm coming in as the developer, and I look out and I see the entire group sitting here like this, you know, versus coming in and everybody saying, "Oh, you're the guy that the city just picked in this RFP process, so let's talk." You know, you get right into the details of it instead of all of the sharp edges that typically. And I mean, I don't have any. I live in Madison, but I don't have any allegiance to Madison. I mean, Madison's got plenty of sharp edges. It's a big city. It's got 22 people on the city council. You know.
Urban design commission. I built the building.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have that many sharp edges, and the few that you have, you can go file off. You know? So you're much more in control of the process here.
We've got a question back here.
Can you talk, a lot of us talked about new development and new buildings. Can you talk at all about the historic building tax credit? And I understand that that can also be used as cash if a developer uses it, and it can be resold for a future cash for that developer at all?
Yeah, actually one of the handouts I gave you, which I didn't talk about, and maybe we can put it up on the screen, takes a market rate development, then you can layer in the affordable housing, and then you can layer in the historic credit, so you can see what it actually does to the rent.
Okay.
The most reason I was late to this because my speaker in class was the state preservation architect talking to the class about how to do historic development, and as she told the class, the most frequent reuse of old buildings is housing. It's a popular thing. So if you've got some older properties you'd like to see some what ifing done, I've got plenty of students wandering around looking for something that somebody has an interest in, getting an answer to versus just a grade.
I think it's also important to say that you can use the 4% blind tax with the WIDA bond program, blend in some city TIF for acquisition and rehab. Because one of the ways to keep costs low is to look at maybe your older multifamily rental stock that could use some refreshment, but you want to keep the rents affordable. So oftentimes, I mean, it takes a little more subsidy to keep those units affordable, but you can use the tax credit to put 50 or 60,000 into each unit to upgrade the quality, upgrade the HVAC systems, and keep them affordable.
We have a question here.
So I have two questions, and they're kind of directed at everyone. So number one, I'm curious, what is the consumer sentiment in a smaller area such as Waunakee or Middleton when affordable housing goes in. So how do the neighbors feel? Are people continuing to move into the city? Are they leaving? Like, how does this affect people who are not living in the affordable housing? So, like neighbors and everything?
Well, one thing that affects neighbors in every community, I mean, close your eyes and just point to someplace on the map, is going to be size. You know, if I'm trying to convince you that the 60-unit development I'm going to do down the street won't increase traffic and won't increase all these other things you're concerned about, you know, on my best day, I'm not going to convince you.
Right.
If I'm talking about a 20-unit property, you might say, okay, I get that. If I'm talking older adult, it's much easier than family. Management is an issue. You know, talk to your local police department. They'll tell you that in probably 100% of the cases where they have a lot of police calls at a property, it's not the real estate's problem, it's the management agent's problem. You know, where real estate doesn't go bad on its own, it goes bad because somebody didn't manage it properly. So it's not, it didn't get built to be bad. It got bad because management was not dealing with it. So you as a neighbor would be quizzing me, well, are you going to manage the property? Most developers don't manage their property. They develop property, they hire a property manager. So then you're going to want to say, well, who are you going to hire? And I'm going to say, well, that's my business. You know, if you want to make that decision, then you be the developer. And, you know, then that's when the parties start to not agree. So I mean, we hear a lot about NIMBY, but I think my experience has largely been that it is natural for people to be cautious if they don't understand what is being talked to them about. And let's face it, most people are not multifamily real estate developers, so a lot of what they hear the developer saying, it doesn't connect with them. And finding a way to better educate folks about what it is and what it isn't. I mean, talk about land. I mean, why would the city want to buy land? Well, if I buy the land and I put the building on it and I'm the developer, it's mine. If you buy the land and you lease it to me for 99 years for $1, you can bet in the details of that lease are going to be some requirements that I pay attention on how that property is being managed. And you kind of indirectly get some control over the private development without having to use your zoning code and your building inspectors and call it a nuisance and get the police department and the district attorney and everybody else involved. It's just very easy to do it on the land lease because on that development I showed you, the land on that property was $750,000. 15,000 bucks a unit, that's kind of market price for a per unit multifamily development. If that was your 750 and I was paying you $1 a year to get use of that land, you can also say, hey Tom, we want to see the impact of that 750 dropping rent, not increasing my profit. It's very difficult for you to control my profit when it's all mine. Now there's a benefit of a bargain. You've got the land, you're leasing it to me. Now you can start suggesting that I do these things and then you can contractually make it so. And that's another reason why I think a lot of communities don't do this, because the question is, how do we control it? So we buy the land, we get this affordable housing in, and we find 3 or 4 years from now the price has gone up and it's no longer affordable. Nasty letter from the mayor, doesn't get returned by the developer, and you say, well, we're not going to do this again. So recognizing that up front, a land lease is a dynamite way to do it.
Oh, I have one more piece of the question. Sorry, I should have thrown this in. Can you also speak to how this affects the property values in the surrounding area? And I mean the immediate surrounding area. So let's say a 20-unit affordable housing project goes in. How does that affect the property values of the homes, whether or condos, apartments, whatever is in the immediate area? I'm not talking the city as a whole, but
I can tell you the academic evidence is abundantly clear. It does not reduce the property values of the neighbors.
Okay.
And none of them have ever been convinced when I tell them that.
Yeah, do you have any like data that you show people to convince them? 'Cause I feel like that
People
would
who
be a big piece of
NIMBYs are not convinced by data. I'm sorry. But I think Greg wanted.
Well, I think it's important for the purpose of this conversation to distinguish rental versus ownership housing, because the generic term affordable, you know, I can tell you that, you know, my work on community land trust has been entirely around owner-occupied, and we've never gotten any pushback because we've been viewed as a stabilizing force in neighborhoods where people are going to be there for quite a long time to participate in the neighborhood. So, you know, a key thing is when you're looking at your affordability strategy, you know, do you want to have an ownership strategy? You know, and if so, who do you want to serve with that? And that's a really critical thing to think about, because generally it all gets reduced to low-income housing tax credit, which is a great program, but it's for a specific target group of folks. And, so just be clear on who you want to serve, and then you can kind of figure out what strategies are there.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
So, again, on the Plan Commission, we've seen a lot of NIMBYs. We've got some projects approved, even despite a lot of NIMBYs. We've got others that have failed, so we can talk a lot about that. But I want to reemphasize Tom's point. Management is critical. Part of the problem, so I talk a lot with the mayor and people in Sun Prairie. When people hear affordable housing, unfortunately their perception is the older housing, usually controlled by out-of-state absentee landlords who are not managing the property or screening their tenants. But the newer affordable housing, like the stuff that Jacob Klein has built, there's a professional management company, it's large enough, there's someone on site. You would have no differences with the city and police and health violations than you would with any other multifamily. In fact, the part of the issue is it's your older, smaller units, right, the 8-plexes in Fitchburg, for example, that have a lot of the biggest complaints because it's not professional management, it's a dentist in Illinois just taking it as a tax revenue. So management is critical, and it helps to change people's perception that most modern affordable housing, especially with the tax credit program, is very professionally managed. Because the developer knows that if you have problems and you lose the certificate of occupancy, your investors are going to try to get the tax credit back. So they have skin in the game. So this is not old-fashioned affordable housing.
I could just add, one of the things, I mentioned the mobile home parks, conversions to cooperative, which is this pretty successful phenomena. And I mean, they're converting, you know, I mean, dozens every year all across the country. Mobile home parks have a terrible reputation in general, and they're underinvested often by the owners. When the conversion happens, one of the things that they build into those contracts is enough money so that the board of directors gets some assistance, which is to the property management issue. So they have looked at that weakness and that risk that a group of people may not reinvest properly, and they have dealt with that issue. So I really like this idea of the city buying the property and then using that leverage to get what they want, one of which might be proper property management. And in co-ops, we have that example.
If you are a city running a development process, you want to get the credentials of the development team and look at some of their property lines.
I want to just see who's got their hand up.
I just have a comment about the living next to lower income. I live by Lakeview, one of the developments that is lower income, a block away, and our house just continually raises in the price. We've never had an issue with market value not continuing to go up, other than when the housing crash happened, and then of course everybody's property values dropped. But it has gone up every year, and there's no problem. Other than ambulance calls, there's no more police calls there than any other place in town. I mean, there's not an issue at all. and there's Section 8 in there. The apartments, I know for a fact, can run between $500 or $600 a month for a 2-bedroom. There's a little bit of issue with some of the upkeep. I know somebody who lives in there, but the management is actually now going in and cleaning up the basement. There was an issue with mold in the basement. And several of the new people living there actually pushed back on the property. So you have to support the people who are living in these as well as saying, okay, yeah, this is fine for my neighborhood, but you also have to keep up pushing the property managers and stuff.
And just to be clear, because we've talked a lot about the affordable housing tax credit, more often than not, you see it on larger multifamily buildings, largely because of the economy of scale that developers need. But the only thing that the IRS is unwavering on is that everybody who lives in the unit, the maximum income they can have is 60% of the county median, and it's set by family size. So you could do 60 single-family homes scattered around Waunakee. You could do one 60-unit multifamily building. You could do 3 20 units. You can mix and match it any way you want, and there's a provision in the tax code that allows you to exit the tax credit program after 15 years if you sell the home to somebody who fits into an affordable range. And that might be a way around some neighborhood issues to say, look, we're going to build this house, it's going to be rental for 15 years, and then in year 16, the house will go on the market. And of course, it's going to go on the market for a much lower price because it really only has to pay off the mortgage, because the tax credit investor doesn't get their money back. I mean, they get it through their tax savings. So you could, I can just give you the numbers. I worked on building 48 single-family homes up on the Red Cliff Indian Reservation. Those houses cost about $230,000 a piece to build. They were 3-bedroom, slab on grade, lots of solar, energy, hot water heater, very green. And if they sold for what the mortgage will be on those houses at the end of 15 years, they'd sell for about $41,000.
Okay, I want to just tabulate the number of hands up, just these 2. Okay.
Okay. Adam Kangles, I don't know if any of you have heard of him, writes Market Urbanism, and I'd like to read something that he wrote and get your opinions on it. He wrote, if a city chooses to burden the suppliers of housing with the cost of inclusionary zoning, it should not be implemented until exclusionary zoning is removed.
I'm going to take that. I put in probably 200 hours on the committee that drafted Madison's inclusionary zoning ordinance, which was widely viewed as a failure. And it's not because inclusionary zoning is a failure, it's because that ordinance was poorly crafted. And so inclusionary zoning works when it's well designed. I don't know what you mean by exclusionary zoning, so I'm not going to address that issue. But if you're going to look at inclusionary zoning, you want to create incentives for people to do the right thing, whether that's affordability, whether that's environmental sustainability, what have you. You need to bring in an expert from the outside, not from Madison, but someplace where it's been successfully implemented, so that you're gaining all that experience from around the country to make sure that what you're requesting of developers is compensated by the incentives that are being offered. So there's lots of examples of successful programs in California and in Vermont. Burlington, Vermont in particular, has had a successful program for many years. Boulder, Colorado as well. And so, if you're going to look at that, do your research, look at what best practices are nationally. And then if you're really seriously considering it, spend some money and bring in a consultant who can really help you craft something effective.
Thank you.
And Montgomery County, Maryland is a great.
Yeah.
So let's see a couple things quickly. Unfortunately, state law changed a couple months ago,
and prohibits inclusionary zoning as a mandate. Yeah. I'll show you the section of the law. But that's as a mandate. But when I'm a city and we're using TIF, then it's a negotiation. So if you want the incentive, you can have some of the units affordable.
Yeah.
So what he's talking about is exclusionary zoning. So market urbanism is part of a national association, a movement called YIMBY, yes in my backyard, right? And they're using this argument from the market that says restrictive zoning regulations. So exclusionary zoning is largely when communities only allow single family, they don't allow multifamily, and they impose large minimum lot sizes. My own personal view, speaking for myself, is that in this day and age, if you have water and sewer in a public, there's no reason for a minimum lot size larger than 6,000 square feet. Now that shocks people, right? But that's what's driving up the cost of housing, is requiring people to buy 15,000 square feet to build a house. Because when that land is that expensive, you're not going to put a modest 3-bedroom, 1,800 square foot house. You're going to have to build a 3,000 square foot house with the granite and the super high range to cover your land cost. So I think what he's saying is a lot of people in the real estate community are opposed to inclusionary zoning as a mandate because they say it drives up their cost. And he's saying, but communities need to look, are they doing exclusionary zoning with large minimum lot sizes that are driving up the cost of housing?
My understanding is that Minneapolis is either has dropped their zoning or looking at it very carefully at dropping there. So you might want to check that out.
What they're doing is they're allowing in the single family zone, instead of limited to one family, it can go up to 3 families on a structure.
Which is significant for affordability.
Right. With no additional parking requirements. That's also, right? Because that's the other thing, is you can be flexible with parking requirements, because require a parking stall adds 20,000 if it's surface, 40,000 if it's structure. I mean, that's a couple $100 of rent a month just covering parking.
And I think when you kind of peel away the layers of the inclusionary or exclusionary zoning, the impetus in a lot of communities for that type of regulation is to get me as a developer to do something. And you're going to use the zoning code to incent me or force me, or depending upon who you're talking to do certain things. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record. I really do have other ideas other than the city buying the land, but or creating a land trust. But you eliminate the whole need for any type of restrictive zoning or inclusionary zoning. If you're picking the sites, I'm doing the development. Because then you're getting what you want where you want it.
Because as a landlord, you can set whatever restrictions you want.
Right. In the same way that if you say a minimum lot size in an R1 zone is 6,000 square feet, if a developer wants to buy it, but she wants to make 8,000 or 10,000 square foot lots, that's the market, right? That's fine, she can do that.
But we don't need to give them tips then? If they won't compromise with the village?
Well, so this is an area where you can have a TIF policy. You do have to consult with your council, but the purpose of TIF is economic development. Workforce housing is economic development, and economic development is workforce housing. So we've been successful in Middleton in negotiating, because we can say, if you have a portion of your units with TIF, those units rent like that, right? And so that's, for a landlord, reducing your vacancies. We can tell them that Jacob Klein's, all the LIHTC projects are 100% pre-leased, no vacancies at all. So if you have a few units that are set aside, in exchange you're getting TIF, you're in essence getting the same rents. Why wouldn't you do it? But you can try to, it's the same way that when a developer comes to you and asks for TIF, you have a policy and says, we're not just giving away the money, we're giving something, but we're getting something. Maybe structured parking, maybe solar, maybe additional parking for a municipal building. There's all sorts of public benefits. Affordability is a public benefit as well.
You could say, okay, do you want some TIF I want you to when you're building the building, I want 3,000 square feet built suitable for a child care center. And I want you to set it up so that the child care operator pays you $1 a year for rent. They pay for their operating costs. And then the lease would provide the child care operator with the incentive to reduce the cost of child care because they're not paying for occupancy. That's the second highest cost in a child care center. The highest one is the people. And typically they had economies of scale as well. So you don't see 20 and 30 unit child care centers. You see 70 and 100 unit child care centers, the same way you see 50 and 70 unit multifamily. So anything you can do to break the economy of scale there is a significant thing. I talk mainly about multifamily because that's what you were interested in. My UW classes also are focusing heavily on small lot, single family, and I see most of you have a pen out. So if you're ready to write, I'm going to give you an address that you can Google when you get home tonight, or put into Google Earth. It's 215 Femrite, F-E-M-R-I-T-E Drive, Monona, Wisconsin. And what you're going to look at on Google Earth is what used to be a big lot with a huge single-family home. It was the farmhouse of the farmer whose 200 acres got sold to be that part of the city of Monona. And it was also, over time, it was just a big lot with some outbuildings surrounded by a lot of residential. If you're familiar with where the Leopold Center is in Monona, it's right across the street from that. If you go to the Leopold Center, you've driven past 215 Femrite Drive. And what the developer did was to put 6 $400,000 homes on very small lots. The set-asides are the same as you would have in the older parts of Waunakee where the houses are very close together. People will live in older part of the city with houses close together because that's what there is. But if you wanted to build houses with that type of side yard in the new subdivisions, the realtors and everybody else would look at you and say, well, my goodness, we couldn't sell it. Well, it's not that people won't live there. They're living in the community in other places. So, you know, don't take the argument that that's not the issue. It's what Kurt was talking about, and it goes back to what the city required the developer to do in that subdivision as far as lot size. But 215 Femrite Drive, that, for those village people that are here, it was assessed at $318,000.
Is this it?
Yeah, you got it?
Yep, those are the 6 small lots.
Yeah, there you see them right up there.
So you have shared parking, a split driveway in the back.
Yeah, there's like a little resident association here, but these are fee simple. Oh, this is not a condo. These are fee simple homes. They're just on small lots. That's on the tax rolls now for $2.4 million, up from $318,000. Lots of opportunity for a little TIF in there if you were going to do that to incent it. Now these are $400,000 homes. 2 of them occupied by older adults who moved out of their single family home. One is the developer, and 2 of them are former employees of Epic who run a consulting business out of their respective houses. Now what my classes are looking at is that concept, but not $400,000 homes.
Right.
Maybe something in the 200 to 250, and what does it take to get there?
Or it could be a little co-op.
Yeah, and you can take a, you know, go drive by it. I mean, it's over in Monona. It's not that far from here. And I mean, you could replicate that in a heartbeat because I had the developer in my class, and the most complicated thing he had to do was to convince the city of Monona plan and zoning people to let him take a single-family lot and slice it into 6 single-family lots and allow the zoning to go forward. So it was controlled by, I mean, his success was controlled by the community. It wasn't the financing, and he's got, I mean, those are $400,000 homes on lots the size of a postage stamp compared to what gets done in the new subdivisions in communities. So, you know, you all control most of the moving parts that are going to be needed to get development streamlined. But it's going to be kind of outside the box thinking from what is traditional, but it's not dangerous. I think, you know, it's just, you gotta kind of scratch your head. But Monona, you could talk to the people in Monona as well on how to do it, but that's a real deal, and you could make that happen anyway.
We're going to take one more question, and then we're going to take a break where you can ask the speakers individual questions, and then we'll come back for a short discussion. So, last question.
I just wanted to ask about co-housing and co-ops. What's the value added for a village like Waunakee to be considering that kind of a model? Like, because it would be very different for here.
Well, for our project, a lot of the interest was driven by people who already live in the neighborhood, but whose housing no longer worked for them. Either it was too large, the maintenance responsibilities were too high, or it was no longer physically accessible. So being able to stay in the neighborhood was an important driver, and then also participating in the design process is a unique opportunity that most people have never had their whole lives. And then lastly, being able to move into a community that's already been established. Because when people downsize, they often completely lose their sense of community. So I think those are all things that could be appealing to folks in Waunakee as well, I would expect. And one point I do want to make is that the reason that we did this as a condominium was because that's the financing that we could get to do the project. I would have greatly preferred to do it as a cooperative. I much prefer the model, and it's far simpler than the condominium model, which most people do not realize. So, you know, like maybe you have a local lender here who might be willing to step up and do something like that.
I do think that a lot of the questions that have come up, you know, about NIMBYism and those things, I mean, that's one of the reasons to consider a co-op if you're talking about affordable and multifamily at any size. Ownership, you know, if you can tell the story of ownership and build the ability for somebody at a fairly low income to build equity, you know, those are things that all of us can understand. Taking some of the speculation out of housing so that it isn't necessarily the way to build incredible wealth. I think people are starting to think that maybe preserving affordability is also very important. And as an alternative to strictly rental, where the risk of a bad property manager and things like that, co-op can begin to seem attractive, even if it is different. And I guess that I just finish by saying that there's also a lot of flexibility in the financial model that you put together. I was in Montana. Speaking to 15 different rural communities, all facing horrible housing issues, and that was one of the things that really attracted them, was the variation in forms that you could put together.
It seems like it could help humanize also people. So you might break down some of that, not in the neighborhood stuff.
Right, the barriers, right. Because these are homeowners that are moving in, and that's the way to talk about it.
So I'd like to thank our speakers coming out on the It's so informative, and I feel like there's a lot of ideas. Hopefully there's some ideas that you all feel will be relevant to Waunakee. Kristen gave me a time check, and she said, well, if you break and then come back, it's already 8:15.
People are going to
leave when we break. So I stand corrected on the time. We do have a good business to still do, and I'm going to ask for your opinion on this. We had hoped to be able to get to that question that Greg asked of who do we want to serve and how much. It's a big question, though. Do we want to look at the gaps, the housing gap, and determine what's the goal? What's a goal for the community, both for home ownership and for rentals? So I'd like to leave this to the group. We can start that conversation and take 15 minutes to just hear some opinions, or we can push it back to our next meeting. Any strong opinions?
I personally think that we've heard an awful lot today, and we need to sit back and digest and really think about it so that we can have a meaningful conversation next time, rather than little pops of popcorn right now.
Great. Others?
I agree.
Agreement? Okay. Others? Anyone object?
Is it official? All in favor? Opposed? Okay.
That was a really nice
I want to say something about the gap numbers, just as you consider my gap numbers. Those are people, the main gap numbers reflects people who are already living in Waunakee. So there are some communities where their gap numbers have gone down because it became so expensive that all low-income people just left their community, like the village of Oregon. Their numbers went down. So that's not necessarily the only way to look at the gap. Another way is to look at what would be your fair share of the region, maybe to think about how many jobs you have relative to how many housing units. So, I mean, there's a quirk in the way I calculate the gap, which is if you priced out all low-income people, you would look like you reduced your gap. But that's not what you wanted.
And Rachel, our grad student who's trained by you, is looking at that fair share number, and we'll have that breakdown.
The other point that came up in an earlier conversation is that you can set goals based on current gap, or you can set aspirational goals that reflect issues such as the need for labor in business development. So there's various ways to do it. Or you could say a lowball estimate if it feels that you have to get some experience underneath. But you've got different tiers that you can look at. So, heard of one, I lost one. Reflect only those, fair share in the gap.
But a good way to decide some of this also would be the school finding out how many homeless kids we have in the area. I mean, I know we've had them in the past. I don't know if we have any currently, but.
We do. We have kids. I mean, when you look at the definition of homeless being people who are living, I mean, like, not under like a lease agreement, but are just living without, like, maybe cohabitating together. That's really where our homeless comes in the district.
Yeah.
There's a definite number that is relatively small, but it's consistent.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So April, we're dedicating to continuing this discussion. Excellent. All right. I think we should let our speakers go home. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Also, this is all on video, so if it was a lot and you want to look at it again, you have that option.
Those of you that I answered your question, I think about the historic credit, but